Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is AJ from the Paladin Journal, and welcome back to another review for Star Wars The Acolyte, the latest original series by Disney for the Star Wars franchise. And this episode is titled Destiny, and it is a flashback episode. And this one deals almost entirely with explaining the backstory of all our major characters going into episode one and then what happens in episode two. And just general overall, I have to say that this episode was shot really beautifully. It has some amazing visual motifs and themes and direction, and I think there's rarely been an episode of Star Wars that has worked so well visually. There's episode 5 of Ahsoka. There are bits and pieces from all the original movies, uh, from the prequels, even the sequels, and there's stuff in Kenobi and all the different shows. There's always been an element of such beautiful visual direction in everything. And this episode, which is directed by Kogonada, I thought this episode was also really wonderful in that aspect. And while the story didn't quite work for me, I thought that it was still pretty damn amazing. And I have to say that, just overall, the show seems to be continuing in a very good direction overall with its characters and with its story. And I cannot wait to look forward to what happens next. However, this is going to be where we delve into some more details on this episode. And to begin with, like I said, amazing visual direction, right? And fair warning, there's going to be spoilers here. So if you've not seen this episode, please be aware that I'm going to be discussing some very important plot details from this episode in the review. So, forewarned. So anyways, we've seen so far that, there's this mystery between the twin sisters, May and Osha, and how, one of them survived and was taken by the Jedi, trained as a Padawan. Ultimately, she failed, and she's now, not a part of the Order anymore, and she's just making her own way in the galaxy as a wandering repair technician on ships. However, it seems her twin survived whatever fateful encounter happened in their childhood, and now she's become a Jedi assassin. She's going around killing some important Jedi masters, and this is really something that's like, this is a mission for her, a mission for vengeance. And all the other characters, they're subservient to that big mystery. And this is the episode written by, Jasmine Flournoy and Eileen Shim. And this is the episode where, we get the backstory of what happened, at least from the perspective of Osha herself, who has been one of our main characters so far. And this entire episode is told from her perspective, which I thought was a really interesting choice. It kept the story very focused, very tight, and I think it's going to be an important tool for later on in the show, where we see that some of the events that happened, they didn't quite happen as Osha thinks they happened, because she's removed from those events by the distance of 16 years and from the trauma that she suffered on this during this time. So we might as well be getting some more flashbacks with other characters, especially May, to see what happened from her perspective or what happened from their perspectives. So, anyways, we see the girls as their kids, like 80 years old or something, and there's a tragedy that happened where their home burned down, and now we see that they weren't just any ordinary citizens of the galaxy at large, or just some random people on a planet somewhere, but that they were actually the daughters of two possibly Dathomiri witches. Because the word witch, the word coven is used a lot. The leader of the coven, Mother Anisea, she has the title Mother, which, if you have been familiar with stuff from the Clone Wars animated show or from some of the other books and stuff that's happened around all of this, like Ahsoka, you'll know that Mother is a title given to one of the most senior leaders of a Dathomiri coven. and Mother Anisea, she and her coven itself, they're not quite the Dathomiri witches that we know of. They don't face paint extensively. They don't wear red robes, and they're not, subservient to the dark side. There's a very different aspect of their force abilities and their force perception and their philosophy about how to use it and what place it has in their lives. So I thought that was really interesting tangent to go on to establish another force using faction. And we've seen so many of them over the years, but this one especially, it goes in a very different direction. And while there is some kind of like a cult like feeling to this particular covenant on Brendok, it's no more different than what the witches on Dathomir were doing, or what the Jedi themselves at large do. Dressing in a similar manner with the same kind of markings, so to speak. And I really like that. Like, this was a short episode, right? Like all the rest of the episodes in this series, they're all like 30 minutes, 35 minutes or so. But in that short time frame, because the entire episode is focused on this flashback, we get to learn so much about these particular characters. We don't get the details on why they're Brendok, but we do know that they have been exiled in some way, either from Dathomir itself, possibly, or they might be some kind of an offshoot of the Jedi themselves, and that is quite an interesting thing to see happen. And there is a conflict that happens later on down the episode, but it's nothing particularly violent that you might have expected. Although, like I said, it all goes back to a person's version of events of what happened. We see almost everything here from Usha's perspective and no one else's. So, that is going to, I believe, that's going to be the heart of the mystery here. And we're going to see some more things from May's perspective, even possibly from Master Indara, although she's dead at the moment in the present timeline. But we certainly get some flashbacks about her. And I really like that, they made the effort to visually distinguish the characters. Like Master Sol, he has shorter hair. Master Torben, he's just a Padawan right now. And Kelnaka is also, he seems to be fully in touch with the Jedi Order itself. Whereas from what we saw at the end of episode 2, he's possibly, living life as an exile himself, cut off from the rest of the Order, possibly, because he has a crashed ship and everything on the planet that he's on. And, there's so much going on here, right? And another thing I really enjoyed was the writers took the time to differentiate May and Osha from each other. We don't really get a good sense of the differences in the personalities of the sisters in the first 2 episodes, although, one is a failed Jedi who has left the Order, the other is a possibly Sith trained assassin. But there's so much more to that, to the characters, to the sisters, than just that main difference of who they are. And this is, the beginnings of what their differences are, because they're not as close as I assumed from the first 2 episodes. But it seems that, even when they were growing up, they were just kids, little kids. They had a lot of conflict with each other. May wants to share everything. She wants Osha to be part of everything, and she wants to do everything together. And she believes in everything that the Coven is doing. Whereas Osha she's different. She wants more, and that is part of the mystery of where the 2 sisters come from. And there's so much that harkens back to the prequels here. There's so much more that harkens back to some of the other stories in the expanded universe. And I think this little sprinkling of tidbits, it's, for me at least, it's doing a good job of keeping my interest throughout the episode. There's no point where I'm like, oh, this is just getting boring, whatever. And although, I did feel that they magnified May being a little unhinged a bit too much, and Osha being too much like, oh, I just want to get away from all of this. I don't like this. And But it's a nice way to delineate the differences, right? And it carries over into everything else. And I thought the best expression of this was at the ceremony, because at the point that we meet the two sisters, they've just turned 8 or whatever, and they're about to ascend from being just, kids to being a part of the coven itself. Uh, it's their ascension ceremony. And that ascension ceremony is one of the many reasons why I love this episode so much, because it has a really cool visual haunting theme to it, visual and audio. And the music that they use, it seems to be inspired from some Indian music, because that's the sense I got being Indian myself. The way that the acoustics were, and the way not sure if I call the syllables of the music that's going on, but just the whole feel of it, and the way that the singer is performing, it seemed to be very Indian to me. So that is something I like. It's not something you really see a lot in sci-fi, especially Western sci-fi. And I thought it was a really nice touch to distinguish this coven further from the Dathomiriviches and from the Jedi themselves, and some of the other Force cults that we've seen throughout the expanded universe and whatnot. And that ceremony itself, the dancing and the motions, and some of the witchy stuff that is going on, I thought it was really well done. There was a really good choreography there. There isn't any strong action like the first two episodes, but I don't think I missed it, because this seemed to be a very emotional story from start to finish. And we got some really good looks at Brendok. It seems to be a really beautiful world, if a bit dangerous, which is, I guess, not too dissimilar to planets like Kashyyyk, or even like Naboo, because they have their own dangers, especially Kashyyyk. And I really like that we saw a lot more of Kelnaka here, although I think they could have still done a bit more, because there didn't seem to be a good connection between what's happening with Osha and May, and what's going on with Kelnaka, because he's just there, right? Whereas Torben, we see he's part of the test the twins have to take to become Jedi, and Indara and Sol also preside over this test, which in itself it harkens back to Anakin's test when he was brought to the temple on Coruscant, and the entire council is there for his test. And it's like there's so much pressure on this kid, and that is reflected here. It's a really good visual callback to that, and I like that we saw more of this. It seems a really silly way to do a test, but I guess they're testing the force perception of these kids, so that makes that makes sense, I guess. But overall, the ending was a bit flat. However, I think that there's some more that we haven't been told yet, and of course, going back to other characters' perception of these events, and that's going to happen down the line. But I think overall, this was a really good episode. I would say this is right up there with the first two, although just a little bit below, because it didn't have as much strong action. I said I don't miss it, but I would like to see it, because there is something really sinister going on. Especially if you think about it, within season two, in episode 2, when May and Master Torben are talking, and she's giving him absolution, so to speak, and he's like, "We thought we were doing the right thing." So there is something that May is possibly not the only perpetrator of the dire events that happened on Brendok 16 years ago, but the Jedi were involved. I don't think that Master Sol was involved in those events, but Master Indara and Torben, they were definitely involved. And it does hold up a little bit if you think about it, because Master Indara and Master Torben, they're the first ones to die in the series, and Kelnaka is the next one, as we see from episode 2, Sol being the last. So that could just represent of how May perceives them to be the perpetrators of the tragedy that happened in Brendok. even though she was a part of it, she helped perpetrate part of it. Which brings me to one of the many conspiracies that's been going on in the fandom with the first two episodes, especially with there we have twins. You never really see them in the same place at the same time. Although there is a brief like 10-second scene in episode two for that, and people are thinking that this is all like the Tyler Durden Fight Club kind of thing, which I guess if there weren't some scenes in episode two, I guess that would make sense. But this seems to be a really wild theory that's going around, and you know, we have characters interacting with both of them in different circumstances, and the twins face off against each other, and then all of that is contextualized by all the other different things that are happening at the same time, and we have a character who is on May's side of the battle, Chimera, the apothecary from episode two. He also remarks on this. So personally, I think people are buying too much into this theory that one of the twins is dead and the other is using force projection to be in two places at the same time. But I think that's quite outside the bounds of belief because A, the other characters have to be dumb to not catch on to the fact that Usha is using such a powerful force ability, force projection, to project herself as May across the galaxy, like what Luke did in episode 9, or episode 8, sorry. Episode 8, during his fight with Ben Solo, Kylo Ren. Especially since, we've seen that Osha did not make it as a Jedi. She failed as a Padawan. She probably failed her trials as well, and she left the Jedi Order, and she hasn't trained in 6 years, presumably. So I would think that, if she was using such a powerful force ability, then Soul would pick up on it while he's with her, or that, Yor would pick up with it. He's already so distrustful of her, and, even possibly Jackie could. But, she's just a Padawan, so maybe she's not as attuned. But I would expect that Soul, who has such a strong connection to Osha, as we see, throughout episode 1 and 2, he would remark on it, that he would report back on, or he'd talk to her about it. And where, as May is concerned, we have the characters doing so many different things that the possibility that it's just one person and force projecting or something, whether it's conscious or unconscious or whatever, it's so difficult to believe given what we see in the episodes. And even if it's May, then that implies she's much more powerful than she appears to be. But if that was the case, then maybe she would have been able to take down Master Indara in non-combat, and not have to use, quote unquote, the coward's way, the villain's way, to trick her into saving somebody else, and then while she's distracted, kill her. Although that's usually how things tend to go, or Jedi. But I think it speaks to people trying to believe too much into conspiracies and not believing the evidence of their eyes, because sometimes things are simple. They don't have to be complicated, and that's the instance of this. And I also rewatched the first two episodes to prepare for episode 3, and I thought on the second viewing that yeah, there is some dialogue that seems a bit too iffy, and there's a bit more awkwardness with some of the characters, like when in episode 2 Osha is pretending to be May in front of Chimera, and there's this really, really super awkward dialogue between them, where it's like Chimera already knows that it's Osha, but he kind of pretends that she's May just to carry the deception along, and you know Osha goes in not really thinking too much about what she's gonna say. So that was all a bit weird, and I still find it really odd that Jackie, who's a Padawan, doesn't refer to Yord as a master. Even though he is actually a Jedi Knight, she's a Padawan, and we see Padawans call them masters, whether or not they have the rank of master, they call them masters. There's that. So possibly Yord is a bit of a goof or something. Jackie definitely seems to think so, and I would have liked to have seen some more present time scenes in this episode, but I appreciated the story that the writers chose to do here. And there's so much representation that happens in this episode, and I thought that was wonderfully done. It's not in your face. It's just natural. It's part of the story, and just take it at face value because there's something that has already happened somewhere, and there's always an inspiration for stuff. So it's one of those things where you criticizing it too much or trying to really nitpick is gonna be an exercise in futility because it's like ultimately it's like you know first and foremost you should enjoy what you're watching. I enjoyed this episode. I watched it twice. I've never really done that before on the same day, especially, and I'm having fun. I like the mystery. I like the characters. I love the visual direction, and I love what my hype is. Expect leading me to believe it's gonna happen in episodes 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, because there's so much more going on. Like how did May survive the tragedy, and how she was trained, who really is training her, whether the person we see in episode 1 as being her master, is that guy really a Sith? Is that Darth Tenebris, who was the master to Darth Plagueis, who himself was a master then to Darth Sidious down the line, Chancellor Palpatine? So there's so much going on, and I really like the callback that while Sidious was an apprentice to Darth Plagueis, he took on an apprentice of his own in the form of Maul, and I believe this is in the novel Plagueis, that when Plagueis questions him about it, Sidious tells him that he's not my apprentice, he's a Sith assassin. So that's what we're seeing happen with May, that possibly the mysterious figure in black carrying the red lightsaber, he could be either Tenebris, he could be Plagueis, or somebody else entirely. Maybe one of their Padawan, or maybe one of their apprentices who didn't make it to the actual quote unquote heritage of the Sith under Bane, and he or she or they take on an acolyte to be an assassin because Maul was trained as an assassin. He went out, he killed knights, Padawans, even masters before the Sith were quote unquote unveiled in episode 1. And May is doing the same thing. She's killed Master Indara, she's killed Master Torben, and she wants to kill 2 more at least. And where we go from there, anybody's guess. So there's so much stuff that's reminiscent of what we've seen, which is a nice tie-in to all of that stuff. And also there's an original story being told. And I really love that they went off with the Dathomiri Coven thing here, and because that adds such a great dimension to the rest of the story. And I would love to explore, a separate cult of the Dathomiri witches, because we've seen that in Ahsoka, where what's her name? Sorry, Diana Inosanto's character. I forget what she's called. Damn it. But her character, she's a Dathomiri witch from the Clone Wars. She was on Dathomir. She survived the Purge, and then later on she joins the Empire. She joins Thrawn, and in Ahsoka we see that they ultimately make it to another galaxy where there's another Dathomiri Coven, possibly the origin of the Dathomiri Coven, and there are other mothers there, Mother Clotho and the others. There's so much going on, and I think the Acolyte is doing a great job of establishing new lore, giving us some really great new characters, and overall giving us another slice of the Star Wars franchise, which is the best you could hope for. So yeah, some places the story felt a bit slow, and I thought some things didn't carry forward, like the interactions between Osha and Kelnaka, and Kelnaka's general, he doesn't really do much in this episode. He's just there as, he's just there as a bouncer in one scene, in the other he's a repairman, which kind of evokes how Chewbacca was used a lot in the original trilogy, although he has the benefit of all that screen time, which Kelnaka doesn't. But I'm hopeful we're gonna see so much more of Kelnaka, and that his possible death has been delayed by at least one episode, because I was going to be very miffed if if in this episode this week we would have had Kelnaka possibly die, which I thought would have been a shame, because he's like the first live action female. Sorry, he's the first live action Wookiee Jedi that we've seen, I believe. Pretty sure. So that has a charm on its own. I don't want to see him die. I want to see him survive and help Soul and the others. So, anyways, that's my review for the episode. That's some general thoughts and stuff I had about that, and some other things related to the show. Hopefully, you had a good time with the show. If you didn't, let me know. If you did, also let me know. Just leave your comments down below, and please leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel, always helps. And be sure to check out my socials for all the other stuff that I'm doing. And cheers, guys. See you next week for another episode and another fun time, hopefully. I think next week we won't be getting a flashback episode, and it's going to be a present timeline, and there's going to be some sparks happening for sure. So, cheers, guys. See you again. Bye. Later.